on Broadway with Howard De Silva was going to direct it. It was a fabulous time for us. I mean, to think of it.
She was a Hollywood star, a Broadway icon, and a fearless activist. Ruby Dee could move audiences to tears on stage, electrify the screen with her elegance, and then march in the streets demanding justice, all in the same week. Yet behind the spotlight, she was also a mother trying to raise 3 children in the whirlwind of art, politics, and history. Ruby once said, "The kind of beauty I want most is the hard-to-get kind that comes from within. Strength, courage, dignity." That strength carried her through decades of groundbreaking performances and courageous activism. And it was the foundation she tried to pass on to her kids. So what happened to the children who grew up in the shadow of one of America's greatest actresses and civil rights champions? How did they carve their own paths while honoring the towering legacy of Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis? Ruby Dee was born Ruby Ann Wallace on October 27, 1922, in Cleveland, Ohio, but she grew up in Harlem, New York, a neighborhood bursting with jazz, poetry, and the struggle for civil rights. She often described Harlem not just as a place, but as an education. "The streets were a classroom," she once said. "You learn music from the windows, politics on the corners, and survival everywhere in between." Her father, Marshall Edward Nathaniel Wallace, worked as a porter and later as a clerk, while her mother, Emma Amelia, was a strong presence at home. Ruby was the youngest of 3 children, and she later admitted that she felt like she had to work harder to stand out. Books became her escape. She devoured poetry and plays, fascinated by the way words could move people. "I fell in love with language before I ever fell in love with acting," she said in an interview. As a teenager, Ruby began performing in poetry recitals and school plays, where teachers quickly noticed her natural stage presence. One teacher told her, "You don't just read the lines, Ruby. You make them breathe." That encouragement gave her the confidence to imagine a life on stage. After graduating from Hunter College in New York City with a degree in Romance languages, she found herself torn between her love of literature and the pull of performance. She often joked, "I thought I would end up a teacher with chalk on my hands. Instead, I ended up an actress with grease paint on my face." Her true beginning came when she joined the American Negro Theater, a groundbreaking company that gave opportunities to young black performers at a time when Broadway and Hollywood were closed doors. It was here that Ruby honed her craft alongside rising talents like Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte. A critic reviewing one of her early performances wrote, "And if you are into classic Hollywood icons, amazing stories, and newly discovered insights, then hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, and your support will mean a lot to our channel." Ruby Dee doesn't just act a role, she embodies it. She has the ability to vanish into her character, leaving only truth behind. By the mid-1940s, Ruby had made her Broadway debut in Anna Lucasta. For her, it was more than a job. It was proof that a young black woman from Harlem could stand on stage and be seen, not as a stereotype, but as a full human being. Hollywood soon came calling, but Ruby never forgot the roots of her training. "The theater raised me," she would later say. "It was my school, my sanctuary, and my proving ground." Around this time, her life took another unexpected turn. At the American Negro Theater, she met Ossie Davis, another young actor with a booming voice and a sharp mind. Their connection was instant. Dee later recalled, "I thought he was too serious, and he thought I talked too much. But somewhere in that clash, we fell in love." That partnership, both romantic and artistic, would become one of the most enduring in American history. By the 1950s and 1960s, Ruby Dee had become a household name, not just within black theater, but across the American stage and screen. Her portrayal of Ruth Younger in the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun was groundbreaking. When the play was adapted into a film in 1961, Ruby reprised the role, and her performance cemented her as one of the most powerful actresses of her generation. But Ruby's story was never just about what she did on stage or on camera. It was also about how she carried her family with her through every step. In 1948, she married Ossie Davis, and together they became one of the most admired couples in Hollywood, not just for their performances, but for the strength of their union. As Ruby earned acclaim for films like Edge of the City and later Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, she was also raising 3 children at home. She often said the hardest role she ever played was mother, because unlike a script, there were no rehearsals and no second takes. In one interview, she admitted, "The greatest challenge was making sure my children knew they came before the applause." Even at the height of her career, Ruby insisted on creating a home filled with books, music, and activism. Friends recalled that her dressing rooms often had children's toys scattered among scripts. For her, motherhood and art were never separate. They were threads woven into the same fabric. The balance was not always perfect, and Ruby herself admitted moments of guilt, but Ossie was always by her side. Together, they modeled to their children that love, art, and social responsibility could coexist. Ossie Davis once summed it up beautifully. "Our marriage wasn't just between 2 people. It was between us, our children, and the work we believed in." Ruby Dee's career was extraordinary, but her activism was just as defining. Alongside Ossie Davis, she became one of the most visible celebrity voices in the civil rights movement. The 2 of them were not content to remain on stage or in film sets. They stepped directly into history. She marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., spoke at rallies, and lent her voice to campaigns for equality. At the historic March on Washington in 1963, Ossie Davis served as Master of Ceremonies, and Ruby was right by his side, proud and determined. She once said, "As an artist, you cannot be indifferent to the times you live in. Our art must reflect our fight for justice." Ruby and Ossie were also close to Malcolm X. When he was assassinated in 1965, they delivered his eulogy, a role that shocked some in Hollywood, but solidified their reputation as artists deeply committed to their community. Ruby explained her choice. "We could not stay silent. Silence is its own kind of betrayal." This activism wasn't separate from her role as a mother. Her children often remembered how their home was filled not only with scripts and records, but also with political pamphlets and community meetings. Their dinner table conversations included discussions about justice, dignity, and the role of Black artists in society. Ruby once told an interviewer, "Our children learned early that being a family meant standing up for something bigger than ourselves." Her activism also influenced her art. In projects like the Jackie Robinson Story and later American Gangster, Ruby insisted on portraying characters with dignity and truth. She refused roles that she felt demeaned Black women. "If I can't respect the character, I can't play her," she once declared. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Ruby Dee was more than an actress. She was an icon of both art and activism, admired by peers and younger generations alike. Denzel Washington called her a national treasure, the kind of woman whose presence reminds you of what dignity looks like. In the later decades of her career, Ruby Dee proved that age could not dim her brilliance. She continued to act on stage, in film, and on television, delivering performances that critics described as timeless. She took roles that reflected her depth and humanity, always avoiding caricatures. One of her most celebrated performances came in 2007, when she appeared alongside Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe in American Gangster. At the age of 85, Ruby received her first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She humbly said at the time, "The nomination is an honor, but the real honor has been the work, the chance to tell stories that matter." But the Oscar nomination was just one chapter in a career filled with recognition. Ruby had already won Emmy Awards for her television work. Obie Awards for her stage performances. And in 1988, she and Ossie Davis received the National Medal of Arts. They were later awarded the Kennedy Center Honors in 2004, one of the highest cultural accolades in the United States. She didn't just collect awards for her performances, she also received honors for her activism. In 1995, President Bill Clinton awarded Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis the National Medal of Arts, and years later they were inducted into the NAACP Image Awards Hall of Fame. Ruby once joked, "You don't start out looking for awards. You start out looking for work. The awards are like dessert, sweet, but you can't live on them." Even as she aged, Ruby remained deeply connected to her family. She often described being a grandmother as her greatest joy, saying, "When you hold a grandchild, you understand the future in a way you never could before." Her children and grandchildren remembered her as someone who never stopped teaching, whether through a story, a poem, or simply by example. By the time Ruby reached her 80s, she had built not only a legendary career, but also a family that understood the meaning of resilience, love, and responsibility. Her daughter Nora once said, "Our parents showed us that greatness isn't about fame. It's about how you lift others up along the way." In her final years, Ruby Dee remained a beloved figure in both the entertainment world and the civil rights community. Even into her 80s, she continued to appear on stage and in films, always with the same grace and passion that had defined her career. She once said, "You keep going as long as the work matters, as long as you can still give something of yourself." Ruby Dee passed away on June 11, 2014, at her home in New Rochelle, New York. She was 91 years old. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy was celebrated across the country. Tributes poured in from fellow actors, civil rights leaders, and fans who had grown up with her films and her activism. President Barack Obama called her one of the most acclaimed actresses of our time, a trailblazer whose extraordinary performances and lifelong commitment to civil rights left a mark on our nation. Fellow actor Sidney Poitier described her as a queen of dignity and grace, someone whose artistry will live forever. Her memorial service was a true reflection of her life, filled with music, poetry, and words of remembrance. Family members shared personal stories, recalling how Ruby would recite poetry at the dinner table, or how she insisted on bedtime stories even after long days on set. Ossie Davis, who had passed away in 2005, was remembered alongside her, and their love story was celebrated as one of the most enduring in Hollywood. Ruby Dee was laid to rest next to Ossie at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, symbolizing their lifelong bond. For her children and grandchildren, her passing was not just the loss of a mother and grandmother, but of a guiding light. Her 3 children, Nora, Guy, and Hasna, each entered her life at pivotal moments in her career and in the civil rights movement. Nora Day, her eldest, was born in 1943 in Los Angeles, while Ruby was still balancing the demands of Hollywood sets and Broadway rehearsals. Ruby once admitted that her labor with Nora was long and exhausting, and that she worried whether she could balance the 2 roles of actress and mother. She said, "I had just learned how to carry a role, and suddenly I had to learn how to carry a child. Both terrified me, and both thrilled me." Her son, Guy Davis, was born in 1952. By then, Ruby and Ossie had become a strong force in both acting and activism. Guy's birth, Ruby later recalled, was smoother than her first delivery. She described holding him for the first time and whispering, "You will have music in your blood." That prediction would prove true as Guy grew into a respected blues musician, actor, and storyteller, carrying on his parents' tradition of using art to touch people's souls. Her youngest daughter, Hasna Muhammad, was born in 1961, at the height of Ruby and Ossie's activism. Ruby was already marching, speaking out, and pushing for equality, and Hasna's birth added another layer of urgency to her mission. She would later say, I felt like I was bringing her into a world that desperately needed to change, and I knew I had to do my part to make it better. Hasna's delivery was healthy and uncomplicated, but Ruby remembered feeling torn just days later as she returned to the stage while still adjusting to life with a newborn. Each birth marked a turning point for Ruby Dee, teaching her not just about motherhood, but about sacrifice, resilience, and love. Her children grew up with parents who were not only artists, but also activists, and they each carved their own path. Nora became a strong voice in sharing her parents' legacy, often speaking about their influence on her life. Guy found his rhythm in music and acting, and Hasna embraced poetry, education, and photography as her tools of expression. Hasna reflected, "My mother's lessons weren't just about art. They were about dignity, about responsibility, about love for our people. That's what we carry forward." Even after her death, Ruby's influence continues. She is studied in film schools, celebrated during Black History Month, and cited by countless younger actors as a role model. Her children and grandchildren honor her daily, not only in public tributes, but in private rituals, telling her stories, listening to her poetry, and carrying on the values she held dear. Ruby Dee's life was a tapestry of art, love, family, and activism. She left behind not only films and awards, but a living legacy carried on by her children, her grandchildren, and every artist who dares to believe that their work can make the world a better place. Ruby Dee's life was a tapestry of art, love, family, and activism. She didn't just leave behind films and awards. She left behind a living legacy that her children and grandchildren carry forward every day. Her grandchildren often speak of her as a gentle but determined presence. They recall bedtime stories that turned into lessons about justice, or how she encouraged them to recite poetry at family gatherings. One granddaughter once said, "Grandma didn't let you get away with anything lazy. If you read a poem, you had to feel it. If you sang a song, you had to mean it." Several of them have followed creative paths of their own. Some pursued music and storytelling like their Uncle Guy, while others leaned into education, writing, and community work, echoing Hasna's values. Even those who chose quieter, private lives often say they feel her influence in their daily choices, in standing up for what's right, in cherishing family, and in never losing sight of their heritage. Ruby's legacy, then, isn't just preserved in history books or award ceremonies. It lives on in her family's laughter around the dinner table, in the rhythm of her son's guitar, in the photographs and poems her daughter Hasna creates, and in the moral compass her grandchildren carry into the future. Ruby Dee showed the world that an artist could be more than an entertainer. She could be a fighter, a mother, a wife, and a grandmother who never stopped believing that love and justice belong together. Ruby Dee's story is not just one of Hollywood fame, it's one of resilience, family, and purpose. She taught her children and grandchildren that art should never exist apart from truth, and that fame means little if it's not used to lift others up. Her presence lingers in the songs her son Guy plays, in the poetry and photography Hasna creates, in Nora's dedication to preserving her parents' legacy, and in the laughter of her grandchildren who carry her lessons into a new generation. More than a celebrated actress, Ruby Dee was a mother, grandmother, activist, and storyteller who believed that love and justice could and must walk hand in hand. Her legacy is alive not only in film reels and awards, but in the living, breathing lives of the family she nurtured and inspired. And now the question is for you. Do you think Ruby Dee's true legacy lies in her films and awards, or in the values she passed on to her children and grandchildren? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy discovering the real stories behind the legends, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next episode. Thanks for watching.